Chapter 4, Ancient Egypt and Kush. Section 3, the Pyramid Builders. At the early part of ancient Egypt, Egypt was divided into two separate kingdoms. One was called Upper Egypt, the other one was called Lower Egypt. These two kingdoms were united under a pharaoh, but the pharaoh is uncertain. There's possible two pharaohs who might have been the one who united the two kingdoms. One was Narmer, and the other guy is Menes. I personally kind of like Menes because I like the name Menes, Pharaoh Menes. The first dynasty, that means a ruling family, began when the kingdoms united. So either Narmer or Menes created the first dynasty in Egyptian history. Now let's talk about where Egypt, Upper and Lower Egypt were located. If we're talking about Upper Egypt will start around where the Nile River begins. So the Nile River began kind of in, down by Lake Victoria. So Upper Egypt is actually south, and Lower Egypt is located by the mouth of the Nile River in the north. I know that seems a little opposite of what it should be, but that's the way the river runs, remember. So Upper Egypt is closer to where the river begins. Lower Egypt is by the mouth where it ends. The Pharaoh is the king of Egypt, and his name means great house, if you translated Pharaoh to English. And the Egyptian pharaohs ruled in a family, so the family ruled until there was no more family members left, or they were overthrown by another group of people. This whole order in which a member of the family rules is called succession. So you have the pharaoh, and then the oldest boy of that pharaoh would be the next pharaoh, and his oldest boy, so on and so forth. That is the succession or the order in which royal members inherit the throne. Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was a god or a child of the gods. And if the pharaoh and the subjects honored the gods, then all their lives would be oh so happy. Because the pharaoh was believed to be a god, religion and government were not separate in Egypt. They were one and the same. Religion, government, together, one. Together, oh, one. Now, Egyptian pharaohs wanted to honor their legacy as a pharaoh with this grand monument or grand temple. And the original ones were called pyramids. A pyramid is a structure shaped like a triangle with four sides that meet at a point. So you can kind of see this, a triangle. And if you were to see an aerial view, you would see the four sides of the pyramid. It was a burial monument. And the first pyramids to be built, it was around 2630 BC by a king named Dozier. He built the first pyramid. It was called a step pyramid. And if you look at this picture here, you can see what I mean by a step pyramid. It looks like you're taking steps up to the top. This is the oldest known stone structure in the world. Later on, the pyramids will move from a step pyramid like Dozier's and be constructed like the Great Pyramid that we're going to see here of Khufu. Khufu was a pharaoh who ordered the construction of the largest pyramid ever. And construction was hard work. It is said that Khufu was a cruel pharaoh because he made his workers work so hard to get this pyramid done. But construction was hard work, having to cut these large stones and to drag them up onto ramps to put these large stones in place. Oftentimes, those stones would break away from the workers and slide down the ramp, and then if you were standing in the way or the pathway of those stones, you get crushed like a bug. So it was very difficult and dangerous work. Now, there has been a common theory that slaves were the ones who put these pyramids together, which is not quite so. There were probably some slaves, but for the most part, it was farmers who did the labor because the pyramid was constructed during the off-season of the farming of the farmers. So the farmers, when they weren't working, they were working on their crops, that is, they were working on the pyramid. So it took 20 years to complete the Great Pyramid. There are three pyramids. And you have Khufu's pyramid, and you have a pharaoh named Khafre, and you have a pyramid for Menkaure. Those are the three pyramids located at Giza. The Great Pyramid is the biggest one and known as one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. You might notice some other smaller pyramids. Those are generally for like the wives of the pharaohs or servants or family members. Now, the pharaohs did whatever they could to try to keep their tombs intact or to prevent robbers from stealing anything. So oftentimes inside the pyramids there were traps involved to keep you from stealing stuff. But the robbers back in those days were pretty smart, and they kind of figured out where all those traps were. So robbers would oftentimes enter these pyramids and steal all the treasures and the mummies that were inside. Now, the Egyptians believed that if a tomb was robbed, the buried person would not be able to enjoy their afterlife because all their stuff was taken from them. It's like if your house was robbed while you were alive and your stuff is stolen and you don't have it anymore, and you're not very happy about that. So the Egyptians believed that their buried pharaoh was not going to be happy in the afterlife if their stuff was stolen. The pharaohs began building secret tombs to prevent grave robbers from stealing stuff, and this became known as the Valley of the Kings. If you're looking at this picture here, this is the Valley of the Kings. This is where it's located. The idea here is that you would not know that this burial place was in this area because it kind of blends in with the rest of the landscape. But this was carved into the cliff, these little cliffs in here. I think it's right down in this area right here. But eventually the grave robbers wised up and found those two and robbed all but maybe one or two of the tombs that were found in the Valley of the Kings. Robbers stole treasures from hidden tombs with the exception of a boy king named King Tutankhamen. Tutankhamen was 9 when he became the pharaoh of Egypt. Now, of course, he's not very old, and he had a lot of people who helped him rule, but he was a boy pharaoh. And he ruled till about the age of 19, where he was mysteriously possibly killed. But his was the only tomb in the Valley of the Kings that was not found by grave robbers. And so a British archaeologist named Howard Carter went looking for this fabled tomb, and he finally found it in 1922. And when he opened up the tomb, it showed how much wealth pharaohs spent for the afterlife. Now, prior to finding Tutankhamen's tomb, we didn't really know what it was like in ancient Egypt. But when they found King Tutankhamen's tomb, it opened up all we needed to know about ancient Egypt and pharaohs. So this picture here is the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus is like the casket of the pharaoh, and it's multi-layered with the likeness of the pharaoh. This was the death mask of Tutankhamen, so this was in his likeness. And you'll notice this kind of weird little thing right here, which looks like a beard. That was a ceremonial piece. It wasn't a real beard. He didn't have this really blue beard where that was kind of twisted in a knot kind of thing. It was kind of a symbolic thing to represent the pharaoh. So you would see all pharaohs wear this kind of chin strap kind of thing. Here is Howard Carter looking at the tomb of Tutankhamen, each layer of the sarcophagus. This are the jars that hold the organs of Tutankhamen. And this is some of the stuff that was found in his tomb. The whole time period we've been talking about was the Old Kingdom. When we deal with the pyramids, we're talking about the Old Kingdom. Now there will be a transition into another period of time called the Middle Kingdom. So the power of the Old Kingdom pharaohs broke down into disunity, civil war, and invasions for about 100 years. So it was kind of this gap between the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. After about 100 years, the Middle Kingdom will begin with the reign of a pharaoh named Mentuhotep II, who brought some stability to Egypt in 2055 BC. This is Mentuhotep right there. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty extended the boundaries to the south, took control of a neighboring area called Nubia, and its resources, and increased food production by redirecting swamp waters and using the available land. So the middle dynasty, or middle kingdom, really grew larger than the old kingdom. Now, during the 13th dynasty, this is the 13th ruling family of Egypt, Egypt became weaker due to invasions from the east, like a group of people from kind of the southwestern part of Asia called the Hyksos, who came down and conquered much of Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt is the area right around the mouth of the Nile, remember? And they had much better weapons than the Egyptians did, as well as something new that the Egyptians had not seen, which were chariots. And that will kind of end the Middle Kingdom. And once again, there's a gap between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom, which we'll talk about in a future section. That is the end of section 3.